The parking lot was full of people staring. I stood outside the grocery store, balancing 2 heavy bags in one hand and my sleeping 3-year-old daughter on my hip. My heart was pounding as I repeatedly pressed the unlock button on my key fob. Nothing happened. I looked up. The parking space where I'd left my SUV 30 minutes earlier was empty. At first, I thought I was mistaken. Maybe I'd parked in another row. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was losing my mind. I walked up and down the lot 3 times, carrying my daughter and groceries, desperately searching for the vehicle. It wasn't there. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. The sender's name made my stomach drop. Linda, my mother-in-law. I opened the message. Since you refused to listen, I took the car. Maybe now you'll learn some respect. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I read the words again, and again, and again. Surely she wasn't serious. Who just takes someone else's car? I immediately called my husband, Ryan. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. A 3rd time. Voicemail. Another text arrived. Your husband agrees with me. If you want the car back, stop acting like you're independent. I felt my face burn with humiliation. People were walking past me. My daughter was beginning to wake up, and I was stranded. What Linda didn't know was that this wasn't just a car. It was my transportation to work, my way of getting Emma to daycare, my freedom. And standing in that parking lot, staring at those messages, I finally realized something. This wasn't about a vehicle. It never had been. It was about control. The scary part, this wasn't even the first time Linda had tried to control my life. Not even close. My name is Sarah. I'm 32 years old, and for the past 4 years, my mother-in-law had been slowly turning my marriage into a prison. The worst part was that my husband let her do it. When Ryan and I first got married, Linda seemed normal. Overbearing, maybe, but normal. She called constantly, wanted weekly dinners, expected updates about everything. At first, I thought she was simply close with her son. Then the demands started. She criticized the way I cooked, the way I cleaned, the way I dressed, even the way I spoke. If I bought new furniture, she had an opinion. If I planned a vacation, she had an opinion. If I disagreed with Ryan about anything, somehow Linda already knew about it within hours. And somehow she always sided against me. Every single time. Whenever I complained, Ryan would shrug. That's just how mom is. Those 5 words became the soundtrack of my marriage. When Linda criticized me, that's just how mom is. When she insulted my career, that's just how mom is. When she showed up unannounced at our house, that's just how mom is. I kept telling myself things would improve. Then Emma was born. Instead, everything got worse. Linda suddenly acted like she was the 3rd parent. She questioned every decision I made. She criticized my schedule, my feeding choices, my bedtime routine. She even once told me that if she'd raised Emma, she'd be much better behaved. Ryan laughed when she said it. I didn't. Looking back, that should have been the moment I saw the truth. Linda didn't see me as family. She saw me as competition. And as long as I stayed quiet, she kept pushing. Little by little, year after year, until eventually she believed she had the right to control every part of my life, including my car. Standing in that parking lot, staring at her texts, I had no idea that this was the day everything would finally explode, because less than an hour later, my father would arrive. And the moment he read those messages, he would say 6 words that changed all of our lives forever. Get in. This ends tonight. The ride home from the grocery store was silent. My father gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He hadn't said much after reading Linda's texts. Just those 6 words. Get in. This ends tonight. When we reached my house, Ryan's car was already in the driveway. The moment I walked inside, Ryan was waiting. What was the point of calling your father? He snapped. I stared at him. My mother stole my car. Ryan rolled his eyes. It's not your car. The words hit me like a slap. What? It's legally mine, he said. The title is in my name. I felt my stomach drop. 3 years earlier, when we'd bought the SUV, Ryan had convinced me to put everything under his name. It'll make insurance easier, he'd said. I'd trusted him. What Ryan conveniently forgot was that I'd paid most of the down payment. I'd made half the monthly payments. I'd covered maintenance, repairs, and insurance. But now he was acting like I had no claim to it at all. Then Linda walked into the room. She'd been listening the entire time. A smug smile spread across her face. Maybe now you'll learn that actions have consequences." I couldn't believe it. She wasn't even pretending to be sorry. She was proud of what she'd done. My father stood up from the couch. The room instantly went quiet. "Let me get this straight," he said calmly. "You took her vehicle, stranded her and your granddaughter, and you think that's acceptable?" Linda crossed her arms. "It was necessary. Sarah has become too independent." For a second, nobody spoke. Then my father slowly nodded. The look in his eyes made my heart skip, because for the first time all evening, he looked angry. Really angry. And I had a feeling Ryan and Linda had just made a very big mistake. The next morning, my father showed up at my apartment carrying a notebook. Not coffee, not breakfast, a notebook. "Sit down," he said. I knew that tone. It was the same voice he'd used when I was 16, and he'd caught someone lying to me. I sat across from him at the kitchen table. "What exactly have you paid for during this marriage?" he asked. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "The car, the bills, the house, everything." For the next 2 hours, I went through bank statements, receipts, and old emails. The more we looked, the worse it got. I had paid the down payment on the SUV. I had covered thousands in maintenance costs. I had paid most of Emma's daycare expenses. And despite Ryan earning more than I did, a shocking amount of our household expenses had come from my account. My father kept writing, page after page. Then he stopped. "Sarah, has Ryan ever had access to your banking information?" I nodded. "Of course. He's my husband." Dad's expression darkened. "Check your savings account." Confused, I opened the banking app. My heart nearly stopped. Over the past 2 years, dozens of transfers had been made from my savings into our joint account. Small amounts. A few hundred here, a few hundred there. Amounts so small, I'd never questioned them. Together, they added up to thousands of dollars. Money I'd completely forgotten about. My hands started shaking. "I didn't authorize all of these." Dad leaned back in his chair. "No," he said quietly. "I don't think you did." For the first time, I began to wonder if the stolen car was only the beginning, and if Ryan and Linda had been taking far more from me than I ever realized. That evening, I finally stopped wondering. Ryan answered every question with excuses. The missing money? A misunderstanding. The transfers? Family expenses. The car? Technically mine. Everything was always technically something. Nothing was ever his fault. Then I discovered something that changed everything. While searching through old emails, I found a message from 6 months earlier. It was from Ryan, sent to his mother. My hands froze as I read it. Open quote. "Don't worry, as long as the car stays in my name, Sarah can't do much. She'll calm down eventually." Close quote. Attached was Linda's reply. Open quote. "Good. She needs to understand who's in charge." Close quote. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They hadn't just talked about me. They'd planned it. The control, the pressure, even the car. My father read the emails twice, then a third time. His jaw tightened. "Print everything," he said. I looked up. "What?" "Every text, every email, every bank record." "Dad, why?" He stood and grabbed his jacket. "Because they're counting on you staying emotional." His voice was cold. "We're going to stay organized." For the first time since the grocery store incident, I saw something that terrified me. Not anger. Not frustration. Determination. My father wasn't preparing for an argument. He was preparing for a fight. And Ryan and Linda had no idea what was coming. The very next morning, Dad made a phone call. When he hung up, he looked at me and said 4 words. "I booked an attorney." And suddenly, this became much bigger than a stolen car. 3 days later, Ryan called. For the first time since everything happened, he sounded nervous. "Mom wants to meet," he said. I almost laughed. After stealing my car, taking my money, and treating me like a child, now she wanted a meeting? My father was sitting across the room when I got the call. He heard every word. "Tell them we'll be there," he said. Saturday afternoon, we arrived at Linda's house. Ryan opened the door. He looked exhausted. Linda looked anything but. She was sitting at the dining room table with the same smug expression she'd worn for years. The expression that said she believed she'd already won. "Sarah," she said, folding her hands. "This has gone far enough." I sat down. My father sat beside me. Linda continued. "You've blown this completely out of proportion." I stared at her in disbelief. "You stole my car." It was a lesson. A lesson? Someone needed to remind you that marriage requires obedience and compromise. My father slowly turned toward her. The room became silent. Even Ryan looked uncomfortable. Then Linda made her biggest mistake. She pointed at my father. This is exactly the problem. She's always running back to her daddy instead of listening to her husband. For a moment, nobody moved. Then my father calmly reached down and placed a thick folder on the table. The sound echoed through the room. Ryan's face instantly lost color. Linda stopped smiling. Because written across the top page were words neither of them expected to see. Attorney reviewed. And suddenly, the people who had spent years controlling me looked afraid for the very first time. Linda's confidence disappeared the moment my father opened the folder. One document after another slid across the table. Bank records, text messages, email printouts, financial transfers, everything. Ryan's hand started shaking. "Where did you get all this?" he asked. "From Sarah's records," my father replied calmly. Linda tried to laugh. "This proves nothing." Then Dad pulled out another page. The email. The one where Ryan told Linda that keeping the SUV in his name would help control me. The room went dead silent. Ryan looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Linda's face turned bright red. "That's being taken out of context," she snapped. "Really?" my father asked. He slid another document across the table. A summary prepared by the attorney. It showed exactly how much money I had contributed toward the vehicle and household expenses over the years. Thousands upon thousands of dollars. Money I had trusted Ryan to manage fairly. Money that had quietly disappeared. For the first time, Ryan looked at me instead of his mother. "Sarah, we can work this out." The words made me sick. Not because he said them, because he only said them now. Not when I was crying in a grocery store parking lot. Not when his mother took my car. Not when I discovered the missing money. Only now. Only when he realized he might actually lose something. My father closed the folder. "We're done talking." Ryan blinked. "What does that mean?" Dad stood up. "It means any future conversation goes through her attorney." The fear on Ryan's face was immediate, but Linda wasn't finished. As we turned to leave, she stood and shouted across the room, "If she walks out that door, this family is over." I stopped. For years, that threat would have terrified me. This time, I simply smiled. Then I looked directly at her and said, "You should have thought about that before you stole my car." And with that, I walked out, leaving Ryan and Linda behind for the first time in my life. But the real shock was still coming. Because 2 weeks later, Ryan would learn that the car was the least expensive thing his mother had cost him. 2 weeks later, Ryan's world collapsed. His attorney called first, then mine did. Then the reality finally hit him. The evidence wasn't going away. The emails weren't disappearing. The financial records were real. And the judge wasn't going to care about Linda's excuses. For days, Ryan bombarded my phone with messages. "Can we talk?" "I made mistakes. Mom got too involved. I never wanted this." The last message almost made me laugh, because for 4 years, every time Linda attacked me, Ryan had stood right beside her. Now that there were consequences, suddenly it was all Linda's fault. I ignored every message. Then one afternoon, I received a call from a mutual friend. "Have you heard?" she asked. "Heard what?" "Ryan moved back in with his mother." I nearly dropped the phone. Apparently, the financial pressure from the separation had hit him hard. Without access to my income, without me paying half the bills, and with legal fees piling up, he couldn't afford the lifestyle he'd been living. The irony was almost unbelievable. The same mother who spent years controlling our marriage was now controlling every part of his life. A week later, I saw it myself. I was leaving Emma's daycare when I spotted Ryan and Linda in a parking lot. They were arguing. Not quietly, not privately, arguing in front of everyone. Linda was pointing her finger in his face. Ryan looked exhausted, defeated. For years, I'd been the target of that behavior. Now he was getting a front row seat. As I watched, Ryan looked up and saw me. For a second, our eyes met. He looked embarrassed. I simply got into my car and drove away, because for the first time in years, I had something I hadn't realized I'd lost. Peace. But the biggest moment was still ahead, because 1 month later, the final court decision arrived, and it changed everything. The court hearing lasted less than an hour. After months of stress, documents, and legal meetings, everything came down to a few simple facts. The financial records spoke for themselves. The emails spoke for themselves. The text messages spoke for themselves. Ryan's attorney tried to explain, tried to minimize, tried to blame misunderstandings, but the evidence was overwhelming. When the hearing ended, we were told the decision would arrive within days. Those were the longest days of my life. Then the call finally came. I was sitting at my kitchen table when my attorney delivered the news. I won. Not everything, but enough. The settlement required Ryan to reimburse a significant portion of the money I had invested into the SUV and household expenses. The judge also noted the financial imbalance and documented behavior that had occurred during the marriage. For the first time, someone in authority had seen exactly what I'd been living through. When I hung up, I just sat there, silent, relieved, free. A few hours later, Ryan called. I almost didn't answer. When I did, there was no anger in his voice, no excuses, just regret. I never thought it would end like this. I looked out the window. Neither had I. But then again, I never thought my husband would stand by while his mother stole my car. Goodbye, Ryan, I said, and I ended the call. Forever. That night, my father came over with takeout and a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked. He smiled. "Open it." Inside was a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it. It was a brochure from a local dealership. On the front was the exact SUV I dreamed about owning for years. Dad grinned. "I think it's time you picked out your own car." I laughed harder than I had in months. For the first time since the nightmare began, the future actually looked bright. What I didn't know was that just a few weeks later, Linda would see me driving that new SUV, and the look on her face would be absolutely priceless. 3 weeks later, I bought the SUV, not because I needed to prove anything, not because I wanted revenge, but because, for the first time in years, every decision was mine. I chose the color. I signed the paperwork. I held the keys. Nobody told me what I could or couldn't do. Nobody demanded permission. Nobody tried to control me. When I drove off the lot, Emma clapped from her car seat. "Mommy's car!" I smiled. "No, sweetheart." I squeezed the steering wheel. "Our car!" That single moment felt more valuable than anything I'd won in court. Life slowly settled into a routine. The legal battles were over. The constant arguments were gone. The stress that had followed me for years began to disappear. Then came the phone call. A mutual friend sounded shocked. "Did you hear what happened?" "What?" "Linda and Ryan are barely speaking. Apparently, once I was gone, they had nobody else to blame. No common enemy, no one to control. All the problems they'd spent years ignoring suddenly became impossible to avoid. The fighting got worse, the resentment grew, and the relationship that had seemed unbreakable started cracking. I wasn't happy about it, but I wasn't surprised either, because eventually, toxic people turn on each other. That's what they do. Then one afternoon, I received another call. This time, the news was even more unbelievable. Linda had been telling people around town that I had destroyed her family. The irony was almost funny. She stole my car, manipulated my marriage, helped take money from me, and somehow I was the villain. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt nothing, because Linda's opinion no longer mattered. She no longer had power over my life, and that realization felt incredible. But fate wasn't quite finished yet, because a few days later, I would run into Linda face to face. And her reaction to seeing me behind the wheel of my new SUV would become the perfect ending to the entire story. It happened at a traffic light. Late afternoon, busy intersection, ordinary day. I was waiting for the light to turn green when I noticed a familiar car pull up in the lane beside me. My stomach tightened instantly. Ryan was driving, and in the passenger seat, Linda. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Linda turned her head. She saw me, and she saw my SUV, brand new, clean, mine. The change in her expression was immediate. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something sharper, anger. She leaned forward, staring at me like she couldn't process what she was seeing. The same woman she had tried to control. The same woman she had stranded in a grocery store parking lot. Now sitting calmly in her own car. Free. Ryan looked over too. His eyes met mine. There was no anger in them this time. Just tired resignation. Like he already knew he had lost something he couldn't get back. Linda suddenly started talking, gesturing wildly, clearly saying something to him. But I couldn't hear it, and I didn't care. The light turned green. I pressed the accelerator gently, and as I drove forward, I caught one last glimpse in my rearview mirror. Linda still watching me, still frozen in disbelief, still unable to accept that I wasn't under her control anymore. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel afraid. I felt done. That night, I parked my SUV outside my house, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a moment. Emma was asleep in the back seat. The world was quiet, peaceful, mine. And I finally understood something simple. They never took my car. They never took my money. They never took my life. They only delayed the moment I would take it all back. And this time, no one was ever going to take it again.